Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning into this episode of Conversations on Conflict. In this interview series, I'm interviewing the candidates for Montgomery County Executive, and in this episode, I'm interviewing our current County Executive, Marc Elrich. Marc, thanks for joining me today. If you want to introduce yourself real quick to all the people who are tuning in for this.
I'm Marc Elrich. I'm the County Executive of Montgomery County. I've been serving since December of 2018. So I'm in my 3.5 years.
All right. Yes. And thank you for your service, Marc. We certainly appreciate all the work you do to help strengthen our community. So before I get into talking about, what you've done over your term and what you plan to do, I want to ask you a little bit about your background and your experience that led you to running for county executive in the first place.
Well, I got involved in, I could say, the political world or social change back when I was a teenager. I was lucky enough to have been at King's March on Washington. I went to my first anti-Vietnam War demonstration when I was 12 years old. I was involved in, political activity when I was in high school. Both, civil rights and anti-war were big issues, but student issues were important as well. I went on to the University of Maryland, and of course, I'm in the University of Maryland in the end of the 60s, and still the war dragged on, and so I stayed involved in that and also the civil rights activities. Maryland was a pretty segregated campus when I went there. And I've been involved in affordable housing and basically social justice movements in the county for a very, very long time. I was involved in environmental efforts like to, stop the ICC and to not build the incinerator, and very much in the camp of those who oppose sprawl and spreading development everywhere and kind of focusing it without opening up, the hinterlands for additional density. Been involved I was a city council member for 19 years in Tacoma Park. And so there's a very close community, and government is very personal. When I was on the council, it was not unusual to have meetings go to 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock in the morning because of the amount of citizen comment that we allowed, which I actually prefer to Montgomery County's method of limiting comments and limiting numbers of speakers. And I think it's important to maximally involve people, even if it means you stay up later. That to me just was part of the territory. And I think, we did important things in Tacoma Park. We were the only jurisdiction with rent stabilization. We were able to make it possible for people to stay in Montgomery County and in Tacoma Park who otherwise would have lost their housing. And we made a very conscious decision. We'd have policies that prevented the displacement of people. And I was really proud of that. We were a sanctuary city. We were, a nuclear-free zone, which actually led us to smarter procurement, because when you no longer use the usual suspects for your contracts, you actually had to shop. And when you shopped, you actually discovered you were paying too much. And so it was actually beneficial for us to, make some of the changes we made just in terms of how you run the city. I got involved in county issues around zoning, transportation, and environmental stuff while I was on the council. I ran for the county council 4 times before I won on my 5th time. And I served 3 terms on the county council. And then in 2018, I ran for executive. So I've been involved in a lot of issues across a pretty wide range of topics, and have had to work with a lot of different people.
Yeah, it sounds like it. You said something about how when you started out in Tacoma Park, how it was a very close-knit community. How have you been able to navigate the scaling up as you've sort of been working your way up from local to sort of expanding your reach more and more and working with a larger community?
So I guess philosophically, my view has always been that you always play the hand that you're dealt. So change is natural and to be accepted. You can't accept, you can't go into things thinking that it's not going to change. So it's not been hard. It's certainly a lot more challenging. I was an at-large representative, and I truly traveled all over the county. People saw me everywhere, and I made a point of being involved because what really bothered me is, people would say, well, you're an at-large representative, but you and everybody else lives in Silver Spring or Tacoma Park. And I wanted to try to, provide an antidote to that. So I spent a lot of time up in the Ag Reserve. I spent a lot of time in the Up County talking to people in places that aren't anywhere close to where I live, because I felt like, if I'm an at-large representative, you should get to see me. You shouldn't feel like, the vote was dominated by down county residents and therefore you don't represent us. So I've always been very involved in that. My staff I've always had dedicated staff that works in different parts of the county, because we wanted to make sure that people felt that I was engaged in the issues that were concerning them, that I just wasn't a down county person who happened to be an at-large council member. So that for me was really important. And I feel I always benefit from that, because it's good to know what people are thinking. It's
going back to how you'd prefer the meetings that go to midnight, right?
Yeah, and I have always been willing to change things. Maybe I used to get criticized by some of my council colleagues because I put in the bill, and then after a public hearing, I'd offer amendments to my own legislation. And somebody once said to me, "Why do you do that? It's your bill." And it's like, why do I have a public hearing? I have a public hearing to hear from people. And if people say things that make sense to me, then I need to incorporate them. I mean, I feel like my staff, whatever we do, we base it on the information we have, and we try to craft something that makes sense. But you only have the information you have. And when people bring more information to the table, it's useful to think about it. And I always felt that public comment produced information that needed to be taken into account. I was never a fan of having a public hearing and voting on something after a public hearing, because that's a pretty clear signal that you don't care what anybody said. You couldn't have possibly read, thought about it, digested people's written testimony, let alone gone back and checked people's oral testimony. So I was always not a fan of acting immediately. I felt like people if you have meaningful contact with people, you have to have a separation between the time you hear and the time you decide. And that's the time you think about things and reflect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I like that. I like that philosophy on, I think it's always better to take time and, digest information before making in your case, a very, serious and potentially impactful decision for a lot of people. Yeah. So I want you, if you would like to talk us about some of the accomplishments that you've been able to make in your term as county executive since 2018. And I know, the past couple of years have certainly been rough and challenging for everyone. I can't imagine what that would have been like for someone in your position. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, the last 3.5 years have been pretty hellacious. The 2.5 have been terrible because of COVID. But in my first year, when I campaigned, I told people I wasn't going to do a Christmas tree. I would say, I'm not promising you anything, because we were going to run out of money. And I knew we were going to run out of money. And I said, I'm going to invest in early childhood education and try to move transit along and get the plans moving. But I was not going to sprinkle money over 100 different projects, because none of the money would be meaningful. And there are projects that it takes serious money to have a meaningful impact. Transportation and early childhood education are two of those things where how much you invest is really meaningful in terms of what you're able to do with it. And so that's what I said I was going to do. And I thought I ran a campaign with probably the least promises anybody ever made. And it's probably true today. I mean, I'm not telling people I'm going to, turn George Avenue into a boulevard and not tell them it'll cost billions of dollars. I focus on things I think I can do. And so I was pretty focused on what I wanted. But, my second day in office, and this is when my prophecy about running out of money came true all too quickly. I get a visit from the financial folks here, and they came down and said, we need to have a meeting with you. And the upshot of the meeting was our revenue estimates for this year are wrong. We have a $45 million shortfall or something, and you're going to have to make cuts in this year's budget.
Day two. There you go.
And I will tell you, the most painful thing that I've done was to go line by line through a budget and make cuts in people's programs, because now I think everything the county has tried to do whatever we passed on the council in terms of legislation that provided after-school programming or services through all of the agencies which basically serve people, to make cuts in things that people need and there was a consensus around, were really, really hard cuts to do. And when anybody says that it's only this much money, only that much money, $25,000 could be the amount of money for a senior feeding program. That was one of the things I absolutely refused to cut. It actually is meaningful to people, and the loss of those things was really hard. So for me, that was hard. And we got the budget in shape, and then the state came down a couple of weeks before we were going to submit the budget and said, oh, by the way, our income tax revenues for the county are off by about $50 million. And there we were making another set of cuts and revising our budget for the year going forward that we're supposed to submit for the year that starts in July. So here we are in March having to make cuts, not only in real time for what we're doing, but also cuts to what we were going to do going forward. And I'm progressive. I wanted to do things. I had a vision of, what we'd be able to do with the county, and all of that kind of melted away. It was basically you were stuck with the same services, and let's get beyond this. One of the successes that came out of that is we started looking at why Montgomery County's tax base wasn't growing, and we found an enormous error in the way property taxes were calculated in the county. There had been like a 30-year misinterpretation of how we were supposed to do this. And it ran into flack. Just telling people we've been doing something wrong for 30 years is not something anybody wanted to hear.
That's a tough sell.
So we wound up doing a charter amendment, proposing a charter amendment, and that's a charter amendment that the residents voted on and passed. And it's had a real positive effect on the county. But the old system basically limited the revenues we could possibly raise. And it was meant to include things. You were supposed to exclude from your calculation things like new construction. And what we had done is, because the way it was interpreted, we weren't getting all the new construction. So we had this weird thing where, assessments would rise and we'd be cutting the tax rate in order to keep the tax below a certain cap, which meant that projects that, normal economic development, everybody's out there saying more development brings more tax revenue. We were actually being sabotaged by what we had done. So the residents passed the changes in law. That was a really big deal. It didn't result in, hundreds of millions of dollars, but, a couple of $10 million every year over year is an important, asset added to the county. So that to me was a big victory. My second budget came in COVID, and we introduced it, the day that everything went dark in the state, and the decisions were made that, we were basically shutting down. The council was not going to meet in real sessions anymore, and they said we're only going to do a same services budget. So all the work we had put into a budget anticipating a not COVID universe when it started wound up being, stymied with nothing new. In the second year, the council also said they didn't want any, basically no new programs. And so how do you, and this is what I bristle at, we all agreed that we weren't going to do any new programs. Then you get criticized for, you didn't do any new programs. It's like, well, you were on the council and I was executive, and we all held hands together and said, we don't know what our revenues are going to be. We're not going to do anything new. And I abided by that, and they abided by that, more or less. And if you're deciding you're not going to spend new money or additional money on things, it's really hard to do some of the stuff you want to do. And I'd say that one of the especially difficult things the second time around was our budget was balanced by federal money because of the miracle in Georgia, as some of us like to refer to it. And so Biden was able to create this nationwide supports for all these governments. Montgomery County was not alone. Every jurisdiction in the state, pretty much probably every jurisdiction in the country, got major infusions of capital to offset the income losses, revenue losses, and unexpected expenses that COVID had caused. And that was good news, and it let us, produce pretty much the same services budget. But there was no way that you could plan that you could go into a budget for the coming year with anticipation of more federal revenues. And so you didn't start new programs that you weren't sure you're going to be able to support the second year.
Yeah, makes
So when
sense.
federal money went away,
Yeah.
it was like, we know we're not going to get it again, so let's not go celebrating to, wildly and spending a boatload of money.
Yeah.
So those are hard things.
Yeah.
But I think we basically provided sound budgets. So we've got 100% funded pensions. We achieved for the first time, our reserve requirements. So despite COVID, we actually met the 10% reserves target, which was a pretty big deal. We managed our resources in a way I think that was pretty responsible and enabled us to maintain as much of our program as we can maintain. We pivoted a workforce and actually changed people's jobs, because obviously some people weren't doing the work they were doing before. Many people got detailed to doing other things that were more COVID related in order to get this through this. So we did manage a major shift in government, a major shift to teleworking in the middle of a crisis, and came out of it, okay.
Yeah.
And I think, I feel pretty good about that. And I feel pretty good about the COVID response. We made decisions that were really hard decisions. And the hardest was early on when you realize it's a virus. Okay, that's a given now, but that its method of transmission was human to human. You weren't going to get it from a mosquito, a fly. It wasn't going to be, rodents running through a building and planting the virus there. This was strictly human to human transmission. And early on, we understood, and Dr. Gales was an amazing public health officer. And we talked about all this stuff in great detail and almost on a daily basis. The realization that the one thing you could do to knock COVID down was to cut human to human contact. So the more we restricted the interaction of people, the more we were able to drive the COVID numbers down. And that was critical then, because there was no treatment, there was no testing initially, and there weren't any vaccines.
Mm-hmm.
So if we had not cut down the human to human contact, COVID would have spread much more virulently through the community. It would have taken a far greater toll on people in the community, because there would have been no treatments for anybody. It would have overwhelmed the hospital system. Our hospital system was overwhelmed even with our trying to control things. The system teetered on the edge of bed capacity for a very long time. And so it was really hard stuff to do, because those are the things when you tell people you can't see each other, you're not going out to dinner with each other, you're not going to movies, you're not going to concerts, preferably you'll stay home, kids weren't in school, all those things are hard for people to do. But I always tell people, we're blessed to be in Montgomery County, where the majority of the population is incredibly educated and rational.
Mm-hmm.
Their willingness to adapt to these kind of restrictions was critical to our well-being. So they,
I love giving some credit to the people there. See, that's great.
Look, I didn't say anything, and Travis didn't say anything that we didn't discover anything new.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knew what we knew. The difference in the county was, and I backed up my health officer all the time. I had the benefit of not being what's called the purple county. And I know in other jurisdictions, the concern about backlash and, public resistance was much greater than it was in Montgomery County. And with the vast majority of the people, embracing the changes we asked for, even if they were unpleasant, it gave us the ability to be honest with people, tell them, what we were dealing with, be frank about why I have to ask you to do these things, even though I didn't like doing them either.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody who knows me, I'm a music addict. I like going out to shows where there are, 15,000 people in an audience. Not being able to do that was hard, but damn it, if people are going to die if we do that, it was not worth doing. And I was haunted by those pictures from New York early on of dragging people out of apartment buildings in body bags. And I saw that and I'm like, this is not happening here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly. So if you, I know I don't want to take up too much of your time here today, but I did want to ask you, if you have any sort of major plans for your next term here, if reelected.
But so there are a few things I think we absolutely have to do. One is I'm optimistic we'll be able to start building out a bus rapid transit network. I mean, I put this thing on the table over 12 years ago. It got as far as getting into a master plan of highways, and then there was no funding. We think we have ways to fund this. We'll be bringing plans to the council about how we can tweak our taxes. They don't actually increase people's taxes, but they put the taxes in a different framework and where we collect them and when we collect them, and allows us to bond. And I think we're going to be able to move forward on transit. So I'm optimistic about that. I am dedicated to changing the way we do affordable housing in the county. The nicest word I would say is we've kind of fooled ourselves into a false sense that we actually have an affordable housing plan in Montgomery County. And, you know, we talk about our moderately priced dwelling units, and I still go to conferences where people say, Montgomery County has a nation leading, you know, affordable housing program in moderately priced dwelling units. And then you find out there are only 6,700 moderately priced dwelling units in the county, which is, as the Jewish expression, bupkis, which means nothing. And, you know, the thing that haunts me is in Montgomery County today, there are 30,000 households earning about $30,000 who can't find affordable housing. And there aren't housing vouchers they're living in. So these are people spending 60% of their actual income to live in Montgomery County. There's another 20,000 who earn up to $50,000 and they can't find housing and they're paying an enormous amount of money. The moderately priced dwelling unit program does not serve these people at all. And we have no program, zero, zip, zilch, to deal with 50,000 people who are mired in poverty because of the cost of housing. So this is a problem. And then we've got projections from parking planning that we lose another 11,000 units by 2030 of naturally occurring affordable housing. And if that happens, that'll leave us with 10,000 naturally occurring affordable housing units where people can live in, and everything else will be unaffordable housing, particularly for people at the bottom. And you know, the council and others have focused on, you must build housing, as if the type of housing you build doesn't matter. And so it doesn't bother them at all that we're like in Bethesda right now, 85% of the units we build are basically at luxury housing levels. 15% of the units are for people in MPDU levels. There's nothing built for people below that. And for people between 75% of area median income, which is $75,000, and say $100,000, $120,000, housing's not being built for them. This is scary because these aren't poor people. I never thought I would look at a place and say, people earning $100,000 can't find a place to live here. And it's because of our policies. So while we require the moderately priced dwelling units, in places like Bethesda, the jump between one of those units and a market rate units can be over $1,000 a unit. So it's not like people who are just above that break off for the affordable housing can find units at market. They can't find units like one bedrooms are $2,500. You need $100,000 income to afford a one bedroom, $2,500 a month unit. That's not the demographic. If you break it down by race, median income by race is closer to $75,000 or less. And so you're building an exclusive community where it's going to discriminate against people who don't make enough money to live there. And it's going to discriminate against people, regardless of color, who are starting out and have, kind of modest paying jobs, or even, a couple that is making, each one of them is making $50,000. If they want to have kids, they're not going to find an apartment there in the new apartments. Mm-hmm. So this is really a problem. And I want policies that change that. I want a requirement that we have to, you have to preserve existing affordable housing. It's called the no net loss policy. You can't knock something down unless you replace the affordable units that are already there. And I've got examples, which I won't do now, but there are two projects already been improved in Bethesda where there'll be fewer affordable units after the new units are built, and the developers got major increases in density and are giving less than we had when we started with. The council should never have let that happen. And you can't hold up what you're doing as an example if you're product is fewer units than you started with.
Yeah.
I want to do that. I'd like to see rent stabilization in the older communities in the county that are most at risk and do not have controls at all, like they were built without requirements even for moderately priced dwelling units. I think we need to do something about that. And we've just put 18 of our parking lots up for sale so we can actually control the housing that gets built there, because if the county is the owner, we're able to dictate the affordability ranges, and we're going to start addressing this wider gap, not just the people in the middle of being low income, but the folks under that and the folks above that. That's going to be a major undertaking. And it's going to require a mind shift from people. Developers are going to have to understand you cannot build communities that don't have places for everybody. Because then you just wind up with, low income housing in part of the county. And I can already steer you to that in about 2 seconds. And you wind up with, high end market in another part of the county. Then you build two worlds. You build two different school systems out of that.
Yeah.
Well, those are two big things.
Those are big projects you got on the books here for transport.
And there's climate change
housing. Oh, yes, indeed.
Which we're going all into. So we're changing our bus fleets, our car fleets. All our buildings, new buildings are going to wind up being net zero. We're doing retrofits, but the government cannot save us. Only so much of the carbon comes out of government vehicles and government buildings, and we're going to need the private sector. We're going to need homeowners. Everybody's going to have to grapple with how do we make this transformation. We'll try to help with regulations that are manageable and hopefully provide incentives and some, whether you call it an incentive or a subsidy to help people make this transition. But there is no achieving climate goals unless everybody plays a role in it. It can never be done by government by itself. So those are three big things. Add in a little bit of racial equity and the fact that we've got to end things in Montgomery County that result in disparate outcomes for people, whether it's schools or healthcare. There's plenty to do. Certainly.
Well, it's comforting to hear that you have plans to tackle a lot of these huge issues here. And Marc, I don't want to take up too much of your time. I do have one last question for you before I let you out of here. And that is, what does peace in the community look like for you?
Boy, part of it is everybody's got to feel like they belong. And Montgomery County has done a lot to be a welcoming community. I think we're probably considered one of the most welcoming communities anywhere. I know that I was at the opening of a big biotech company yesterday, and they talked about our diversity, but not just the factual numbers, but the attitude of the county and the way the county approaches diversity is one of the major reasons they're here. We've started a partnership with Apple on these coding hubs, and one of the reasons Apple is here is because they're interested in working in communities that take the challenges of diversity seriously. And so our partnership is not based on Apple wanting to be close to the District of Columbia or any of that stuff. It's about Apple wanting to work with people who are committed to the objectives they share with building a more diverse and inclusive outcome for not only just students, but also career opportunities, so that a diverse group of students has the opportunity to enter worlds that have they've been excluded from before. So that's part of what peace looks like, I think. And peace is, people need to have internal peace. I mean, a lot of what gets triggered between people are, conflicts that are basically engendered in socioeconomic problems. And, neighborhoods with, high poverty, where households cannot find their way out of poverty. It's hard for them to be at peace. It's hard, I was a former teacher. You deal with lots of kids who are not at peace because their lives are really challenging. They listen to their parents, struggling with money. Kids hear this in every household. Money is probably the number one topic of dissent within a family. But when you have parents who are worried not just about whether you can go on vacation and afford, some of the nicer things, but when parents are talking about getting evicted, not being able to find an affordable place to live, and kids hear these conversations, or when you have students like I had whose last warm meal was on a Friday lunch that's served at the school, and their next warm meal was Saturday breakfast. Those kids aren't going to be at peace. And so we have to find ways to make sure that everybody's got enough of a stable life and has enough of the things that people need to enjoy living in a free and open society, that they actually can take advantage of it. And when we keep households in turmoil for socioeconomic reasons, then we're kind of inviting disruption into the community. We need to help people move to the kind of places that have the same opportunities everybody else has. Everybody's kids should have the opportunities my kids had.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you again, Marc, for coming on here today. Where can people find information about you and your campaign who might be watching this video?
You can go to Marc.
Sorry?
You can go to marcelrich.org, and that's our
It's like the hub for you.
That is primarily the hub for us.
Yeah, and I'll put all the links to your social medias and your website in the description as well.
Yeah, we're like on Twitter, we're on Facebook.
Perfect.
We're all the standard stuff, and I talk to people. I go to meetings. It's like one of my favorite things to do is talking to people, so it works pretty well.
All right. Well, anyone who tuned into this video today, we appreciate it. If you want to know more about Marc, you can click on any of the links in the description below. And if you want to know more about the Conflict Resolution Center in Montgomery County, you can visit us, as always, online at CRCMC.org. And if you'd like to make a donation to our center to support the work we do to strengthen the community, you can do that at crcmc.org/donate now. And Marc, thanks again. If you want to say goodbye to the folks watching.
It's nice to actually be able to talk about things. And I hope, people find it interesting. If you have questions, you know where to get a hold of me. I look forward to talking to you.
Yeah, and I've had a great time talking to you today, Marc. I appreciate your transparency and your honesty. It's been enlightening for me. Absolutely.
Honesty is helpful if you're going to solve problems. Pretending that the world you're dealing with is not the world you're dealing with is not helpful.
I agree.
To be honest, people deal with honesty a lot better than they deal with misrepresentation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thanks again, Marc. I'll let you get out of here. And thanks again for everybody watching. I'll see you next time.
Okay, thank you. Bye.